destroys every scene that he's in.
Absolutely. The spoon line. I can't even tell you how many times that's repeated in our house. It's easily one of the best lines out there. When he's telling his cousin, he's like, when I finally find, Robin, I'm gonna cut his heart out with a spoon, and it's just the setup for that response is it's perfect, and he is absolutely perfect with all his responses. When you're watching Die Hard and you see him come across Bruce Willis, and he meets him and he pretends to be one of the hostages. Mm-hmm. It's just right there with what you were saying, just so smooth, so flawless.
Oh, and his accent, how he changes, because he's British, so he's got the British accent, which is one of the reasons why I adore him. But he changes into that southern drawl and pretends that he's a businessman in the building. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, he turned into Bill Clay.
Yes, Bill Clay.
That's the
Bill
name.
Clay with the southern twang, and he effortlessly pulls into that, and then.
He reminds me in that movie in Die Hard. He reminds me a lot of some of the old like James Bond villains.
Yes.
Like sophisticated. Kept his cool the whole time.
Mm-hmm. He could definitely be a James Bond villain.
Oh,
yeah, he was. I mean, that's just sort of what he reminded me of. Sort of when I think about him in that role, it sort of reminds me of that.
Yeah, he's got that confidence and that I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do and nobody's gonna stop me swagger that eventually gets brought down by the cop who doesn't quite obey the rules, John McClane. And I think in the movie, one of my favorite lines that he reads, that's not actually his line, he's just reading it out, is when John McClane first starts throwing wrenches into their plans, and he kills one of the terrorists and sends them down in the elevator with the sweatshirt on that says, "Now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho." And the way he reads that line out. And he's
it's funny to think about Rickman because, I mean, he had been around before Die Hard, and, so nobody really knew who he was. And then I would say now people who are probably just finding out about Die Hard because of the 25th anniversary last year.
Yeah.
They're probably like, oh crap, that's Professor Snape in the movie,
Yeah, I know. And going back to according to IMDb, the first credited role that they have listed for him is a 1978 TV movie version of Romeo and Juliet where he played the character of Tybalt. And then obviously it goes on from there. He did have several things. He was in a couple of mostly TV series or miniseries. And Die Hard was, according to IMDb, his first big movie. And then he did a lot more TV and a bunch of movies. And we're not going to get too far off topic, but one of the movies that I've been watching recently on Netflix, Sense and Sensibility, where he plays Christopher Brandon, that was another big role of his. Galaxy Quest, where he was Alexander Dane. That was fun. And then obviously Professor Snape as Harry Potter in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which was great because I said from day one of reading the book, hang on a second, we got a little bit of audio problem on the call. Are we good? I'm just getting some static. Can anybody else hear that?
Yeah, I heard it a little bit.
Okay. Alright, seems to be going away. Maybe try turning your volumes down just a hair to see if we can get rid of the feedback. Maybe that's what's causing it. Apologies for the technical glitch, folks. That happens here sometimes on VLR, but we will forge ahead. When they announced Alan Rickman as Professor Snape for the Harry Potter films, I was so happy because I'd been reading the books to some kids I was babysitting before they even made the first movie, and from day one I pictured him as Professor Snape, and he didn't disappoint. He was probably a little old for the role because he's the same age as my dad. He was born in 1946, so he'll be 69 this year, or in 2015 he'll be 69. So he's a little bit older than the age range, but he still pulled it off really, really well.
Yeah, he actually did.
Yeah, he was good. He was really good in that.
And hopefully, I didn't get a chance to look up any of the awards that he's won, but I know he has to have won awards for his career, because he has one Golden Globe, and he's had 16 other wins and 25 nominations. He's been nominated for Primetime Emmy Awards in Something the Lord Made, the BAFTAs. He's won a BAFTA. He's been nominated several times. So yeah, he's got quite a storied career, and this was sort of his launching. This movie, Die Hard, was his launching point into that whole realm. But let's walk. We have about 10 minutes left before we have to take our break. So let's walk through, for those who haven't watched it, talk a little bit about the plot of the story, because everything about the movie is so 80s, and I would say that in a good way, quintessentially 80s, because not only because it was filmed in 1980s, but it just captures the vibe of that decade really well, with the office party and the fashion and everything that's kind of going on. You see the conflict between McClane and his wife Holly. She wants this job, and she's like the right-hand man to Takagi, who's the head of this corporation, and she's trying to advance her career, and it's causing that conflict in their relationship. So she's living on the West Coast with the kids, and he's coming in from the East Coast, and they're trying to reconcile things. And I just think it does such a good job of setting that background up and setting up that tension between the main characters to give the story another subplot that we end up caring about. Because I don't know if it would be the same movie if we didn't have that underlying sort of tension there. Because that, if you've seen it, plays into how the movie plays out, because she is able to hide her identity as John McClane's wife and use her knowledge and her stature to kind of negotiate with the terrorists and do things like take the hostages to the bathroom, get a couch brought out for her assistant who's pregnant in the movie. And then, obviously, when Hans Gruber figures out who she is, that ups the stakes and ups that tension for the final scene. And this, I don't know if you know this, I love movie trivia like that, and this is a completely random bit of movie trivia, but the scene at the end of the movie, when Gruber falls from the building, they obviously had Alan Rickman rigged up in the gear to drop him on a stage to make it look like he was falling from the building, and they were going to do a 3, 2, 1 count and then drop him. Well, they decided they weren't going to tell him when they were going to drop him, and they didn't drop him on 3, they dropped him on 2. So that reaction you see on his face, that's not purely acting. That's Alan Rickman going, oh shit, they just dropped me. They just dropped me, and he actually wasn't happy about it. I can't say that I blame him, because I probably would have had a heart attack. And I don't know how high up he was in the soundstage, obviously, because they're dropping him from several stories up in the building. But yeah, it was Argyle. It was
Argyle.
Argyle, yeah, and I want to talk about him in a second. But yeah, so that's a completely random bit of movie trivia. He got dropped unawares, so Argyle's the limo driver who looks like he's about 12.
Yeah.
And he's one of the best points of comic relief in the movie, because he's John McClane's limo driver, and he ends up parking underneath the building while all of this stuff is going on above him, and ends up sort of being one of the unsung heroes of the movie, because he stops one of the bad guys from getting into the ambulance, which they're going to try to use to get the remaining men and the bearer bonds out of the building. So, you gotta give a shout out to Argyle, who probably has one of the greatest sidekick names. I guess you could call him. Could you call him a sidekick?
Go ahead, Rachel.
I don't know. That's a little iffy. He's with him for all of 5 minutes in the movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But he did, let's see, how many times did McClane, he called him down on the limo phone? Mm-hmm. Once, was it like once or twice maybe?
A couple of times, yeah.
I mean, I think at the point where he punches out the one terrorist.
Theo.
Yeah, the guy who, I don't know his name, but he played, he was in Walker, Texas Ranger.
Yes, Clarence Gilliard Jr.
Yeah, he was great. But
he was great at the SDO.
I mean, I think at that point, he sort of I wouldn't say he was a sidekick, but he definitely helped settle the situation, you know.
Yeah, he was definitely key to the plot.
Yeah, he was for the limo driver who he doesn't have a bunch of lines or, like you said, a bunch of interaction with any other character. It's him in the limo and he's on the phone. I believe he's talking to his girlfriend or his significant other and maybe just some of his other friends. And the thing that kills me is they've blown up. At one point, they fired missiles from the building. They're shooting at, the Reginald VelJohnson's character, Sergeant Paul, out the window. They blew up an entire floor of the building, and he's pretty much oblivious to all of this until he sees Theo come out to the ambulance.
Right.
I don't know how well that building was built, but obviously it was pretty well. If he couldn't hear anything, or the music that he had on in the limo was so loud that he was oblivious to what was going on around him. Or the fact that none of the bad guys happened to notice this limo sitting down there with music and this guy rocking in and out of his own little private party down there because he was waiting for John McClane to come back. So, so shout out to Argyle, who is, the actor's name is Devereaux White, and I'm not even going to attempt to spell it because it's long and has apostrophes in it, but that's who played Argyle, and now, like I said, the movie's going to be, it's almost 30 years old, which is incredible to think about how long that time has come. But we've got, the movie starts out, and it's kind of slow-paced. At the beginning, you have a lot of the setup of, there's a tension between the main character and his wife, and he comes and he's clearly out of place in sort of this glitzy, high-end world. And I'm not even sure I remember off the top of my head what exactly it is that company does. They have a lot of technical stuff, and they obviously have a ton of bearer bonds laying around, but it's obvious John McClane is out of place, and he's the black sheep. And he's suddenly thrust into the situation where all of his training as a New York cop, he probably hasn't seen anything like this. I think there's a scene where he tells Argyle in the movie that, I'm a New York cop, I got a 6-month backlog on New York scumbags I'm still trying to put behind bars. So, this is when in the scene with the limo, he was explaining why he couldn't come out to LA with his wife right away. He's got a 6-month backlog on New York scumbags I'm still trying to put behind bars. So, he's obviously out of place. And then he's left without his shoes, without his shirt, because he's in the bathroom changing when all hell breaks loose and they decide that they're going to take over, the bad guys decide they're going to take over this party and this building and steal things. So for him, he just has to kind of roll with it, and roll with it he does. One of the most iconic scenes in the movie, and one of the most iconic, I think, costume pieces in all of action cinema, has to be him crawling through the ductwork, trying to get away from the bad guys, and then his tank top, which goes from being mostly white in that scene to brown after he's done crawling through. He goes through the ductwork, and then he's got the scene in the elevator, which I think is probably, for me, one of the most intense action scenes in the movie, because he's trying to go between floors, and now he's got and I don't like heights, so the whole thing just kind of gets me on a psychological level, because I'm not a fan of heights, and that open elevator shaft thing is crazy. But so we've got John McClane, who's obviously out of place, and then we need to talk a little bit about just the team of bad guys. You've got, obviously, Hans, who we've talked about quite a bit, and then Theo, who's kind of the nerd, the technical brain, but you've got Carl and Franco and Tony, and I believe Eddie was one of the bad guys. Yeah, Eddie is played by Dennis Hayden, who everybody refers to somewhat mockingly as the discount Huey Lewis, because he does look just like Huey Lewis.
Yeah, I was gonna say that you gotta mention Huey Lewis lookalike.
I think the word that they used in Cinema Sins was discount Huey Lewis. Yeah. So we've got this bunch of bad guys, and they play their bad guyness to the nth degree. Especially Alexander, and I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, I apologize, Godunov, who plays Carl. He's the guy with the long blonde hair, who's brought